A father and his son boarded a commercial flight on Christmas Eve. They checked in. They were seen at the airport. Their names were on the passenger list. The plane took off. It landed. But the father and the son never came out. No emergency. No crash. No mid-air incident. Just two people, gone. And here's the part that makes this impossible. Flights are controlled environments. Once the doors close, no one can simply disappear. There's nowhere to go. No exits. No blind spots. So how does a father and a son vanish during a flight? Authorities said they knew what happened. They gave an explanation that sounded clean, logical, and final. Most people accepted it. For years, no one questioned it. Because once a story feels official, we stop asking uncomfortable questions. But one detail never made sense. A detail so small, it was ignored for decades. A detail that, if noticed earlier, would have changed everything. And 26 years later, something ordinary was opened. A wall. And behind it was proof that the official story could not be true. Because if the explanation were real, what was found there should never have existed at all. Once the doors of a plane are sealed, the outside world disappears. Everything inside becomes controlled, accounted for, measured. Every passenger is counted before takeoff. Every seat is assigned. Every movement is restricted by metal walls, locked doors, and thousands of feet of air. That's what makes this case so unsettling. Because whatever happened to the father and son did not happen in a dark alley, or a remote forest, or an unmonitored place where people vanish every day. It happened inside one of the most regulated environments on Earth. A commercial flight. They boarded like everyone else. They were not late. They were not rushed. There was no argument at the gate. No visible panic. Nothing memorable about them at all. And that's important, because disappearances usually begin with chaos. With witnesses. With moments people remember. This one began with routine. The plane taxied. It lifted into the air. Hours passed. No one reported a disturbance involving a father and a son. When the plane touched down, passengers stood, collected their bags, and exited row by row. That's when the absence was noticed. 2 seats connected by a single reservation were empty. Not because they had never been used, but because the people who sat in them never stood up. At first, it didn't trigger alarm. People miss flights. People change plans. People get off at different connections. But this time, the math didn't work. Because the father and son were not supposed to be anywhere else. They had no connecting flight. No reason to disembark early. No record of leaving the aircraft at any point. And yet, they were no longer there. The question wasn't where they went next. The question was where they went at all. Investigators retraced the obvious steps. Passenger manifests were checked. Gate agents were questioned. Crew members were asked what they remembered. The answers were consistent. Yes, they boarded. Yes, they were expected to arrive. No, no one recalled seeing them leave. That's when a far more uncomfortable possibility surfaced. If they didn't walk off the plane, and they didn't cause a disturbance, and the flight itself was uneventful, then the disappearance didn't happen after landing. It happened somewhere in between. But in between doesn't exist on a plane. There is no hidden corridor, no private exit, no place where two people can vanish without anyone noticing. Which is why the official explanation mattered so much. Authorities stepped in quickly, offering a version of events that restored order to the story. It was simple. It was logical. And it removed the need to ask dangerous questions. Most people accepted it immediately. Because the alternative, that two people could vanish inside a sealed aircraft, was too unsettling to consider. So the case was filed away. The explanation became fact. And the disappearance was no longer treated as a mystery. But even then, something felt unfinished. Not because of what was known, but because of what had to be ignored to make the story work. A single inconsistency, small enough to overlook, quiet enough to survive for decades. When authorities stepped in, their priority wasn't mystery, it was closure. Disappearances create instability. Unanswered questions invite speculation, and speculation spreads faster than truth. So an explanation was offered. After the disappearance was reported, authorities didn't treat it as an airborne mystery. They treated it as a paperwork problem. According to the official version, the father and son were never truly missing from the flight itself. Instead, investigators concluded that the confusion came from records, not reality. Their names appeared on the passenger list. They were associated with the flight. But that, authorities said, did not guarantee they had actually been on board for the entire journey. The explanation was simple. They had boarded the plane, but they had not completed the flight. Somewhere between departure and arrival, they were believed to have left the aircraft during a routine stop or connection. No emergency, no incident, no crime. Just a misunderstanding amplified by time and assumption. From an administrative perspective, it made sense. Flights change, passengers reroute, records lag behind reality. And in a world of busy airports and holiday travel, mistakes happen. That explanation solved everything. It meant no sealed cabin impossibility. No mid-air disappearance. No reason to panic. Once that conclusion was recorded, the case was considered resolved. No search was launched. No deeper investigation followed. There was no reason to look further. Because according to the official story, nothing unusual had occurred at all. And for years, that explanation remained untouched. But even at the time, it relied on one quiet assumption. that the paperwork told the whole story. That manifests, logs, and records reflected exactly what happened in the real world. And that assumption would go unquestioned. For 26 years, for more than 20 years, no one re-examined what actually happened after the flight landed. Because the paperwork appeared complete. But when renovations exposed items hidden behind a wall connected to the arrival area, investigators were forced to look again, this time, at details that had never been verified. The first problem was simple. There was no confirmed record of the father and son leaving the aircraft. Their names were on the manifest. But manifest's record shows intent, not movement. No crew member could later confirm seeing them disembark. No fellow passenger remembered sitting near them during landing. And no airport staff recalled escorting or assisting them afterward. That alone didn't prove anything. But then the timeline was examined. According to the official explanation, the pair should have exited during a routine transition. Yet there was no ticket reissue. No luggage rerouting. No boarding pass scan logged for a secondary leg. In a system that tracks everything, there was no evidence of a next step. Then there was the luggage. No bags were ever collected. None were reported lost. None were stored in unclaimed property. Their belongings did not travel forward. They did not travel backward. They simply stopped. And the items discovered behind the wall made that absence harder to explain. These weren't objects you forget casually. They suggested proximity, not transit. Presence, not paperwork. If the father and son had voluntarily left the journey earlier, those items should have followed them. Instead, they were sealed away in a place no passenger should have had access to after disembarking. And then there was the silence. No financial activity. No confirmed sightings. No contact with anyone they knew. Not immediately. Not days later. Not years later. For a voluntary disappearance, it was unusually complete. Too complete, especially for two people traveling together during the holidays. By the time these contradictions were laid out side by side, the official story no longer held its shape. It didn't collapse dramatically. It weakened. Quietly. And that was the most unsettling part. Nothing suggested violence. Nothing suggested chaos. Just a clean system with one unexplained hole, exactly the size of two people. Which meant the question had never been, how did they disappear? It was, how did no one notice they were never accounted for at all? By the time the case was officially closed, authorities had already made a critical assumption: that the father and son intentionally disappeared. But that assumption only works if you ignore where they were last seen. They were not in a city. They were not crossing borders. They were inside a system designed to track every movement. So let's talk about the only realistic places they could have gone. First possibility. They exited into restricted airport infrastructure service corridors, maintenance access routes, or baggage handling areas that are not monitored like passenger spaces. These areas exist to move machines and equipment, not people. If they entered one, whether by mistake, confusion, or being directed incorrectly, there would have been no automatic alert because no system is designed to detect missing passengers there. Second possibility, they were rerouted deliberately. Not hijacked, not abducted in the traditional sense, but guided. Airports rely on authority signals, uniforms, signage, instructions. If someone with perceived authority directed them away from the normal flow, they would have followed without resistance, especially a father protecting a child. That path would not appear on passenger logs, because officially, they never left the aircraft environment. Third possibility, something went wrong quickly and quietly. A medical emergency, an accident, a restricted area incident. The kind of event that doesn't cause panic but demands silence. And once the official conclusion became voluntary disappearance, the urgency disappeared with it. No extended search. No structural checks. No forensic sweep of non-passenger zones. The case was closed before the truth had a chance to surface. Now, consider the alternative theory authorities leaned on. That the father planned this. That he wanted to start over. Disappear. Vanish with his son. But here's the problem. There was no financial preparation. No history of instability. No evidence of a destination. No follow-up activity. Disappearing is not just leaving. It requires planning, resources, and intent. And none of those were ever proven. Which leaves us with the most disturbing possibility. That something did happen, but because the wrong conclusion was reached too early. No one looked where they should have. No one asked the questions that mattered. And the truth, whether it was a tragic accident, a procedural failure, or something far worse, was sealed behind paperwork, assumptions, and time. This is not just a story about two people who vanished. It's about how quickly a system moves on once it decides nothing went wrong, and how easily the truth can disappear with them. If this story unsettled you, don't let it end here. Watch the next case on this channel, because this isn't the only time the official explanation didn't survive scrutiny. Subscribe to Mystery Vault, because some truths only surface when people refuse to stop asking questions.